I spend a great deal of time with animals, both the so-called wild animals and the so-called domestic animals. And in my experience, this much I know. Animals are conscious. Animals are sentient. Animals have all of the emotive substance that we have. They experience joy. They experience pain. They experience fear. They experience love. Animals, at least from my view, are extremely intelligent. For instance, the birds that you see in this picture, these are magpies. These are so-called wild magpies. These are birds that live in my neighborhood who I've come to know from the time they were young. And these magpies are extremely aware of their environment. Far more aware of their environment than any human being that I know. And they're able to respond based on that awareness. They won't land like this, play like this, be this close to any other human being, because they've been able to correctly look around this environment of the neighborhood where I live and recognize that I'm a human being that they can trust. And they know me as an individual, and I know them as individuals. For the most part, by comparison, the human beings who live in this environment of this neighborhood are completely oblivious. When they see these magpies, they don't see them as individuals. They don't know them. They don't come to recognize very much about their environments at all. Magpies are aware of every little thing that goes on, every little change, every new face. You know, when I look at this dog, this is my daughter's dog, Wendy, and she got Wendy out of an animal shelter. Wendy was an abused dog, and when she came into our house, she was really fearful. And in less than a year, she's turned around to be a very happy dog and a very loving dog. And, you know, when I look at Wendy's face, there's no doubt in my mind at all that Wendy has consciousness, that Wendy has feelings, that Wendy has thoughts, that Wendy's just trying to get through this life like anybody else. And I think anybody that spent any time with animals, even just their pets, recognizes this. And I think it is part of a fundamental ethical dilemma for human beings universally around the globe. And it's such a fundamental ethical dilemma that I feel that entire belief systems are largely based around this recognition that in one way or another, every belief system, every culture, every way of life has had to wrestle with this thing with animals, with this recognition that they're sentient beings and they're much like us. The reason that there's ethical dilemma at all is because we have to eat. We have to eat something in order to live. And there's all kinds of perspectives on how to eat based on the ethical dilemma, like responding to that ethical dilemma. Do you eat animals? Do you eat any kind of animals? Do you eat only certain animals? Um, me, I see that even if you even if you choose to be a vegetarian, that means you have to rely on growing a lot of plants, and that usually means monocrop agriculture. And monocrop agriculture requires clearing animal habitat, and in effect, you hugely reduce animal lives through vegetarianism. But we have to eat something, right? This happens to be a stew. It's made with some vegetables, some carrots, some potatoes, and it's made with some meat. There's a little bacon in here, and there's some porcupine. I eat porcupine meat along with all kinds of other meat. And for those who have hunted, who've ever hunted animals, they'll know that it's it's not easy to kill animals, and it's because of that recognition that they have that sentience, they have that consciousness. If I go fishing for a pike and I reel a pike in, I take my needle nose pliers that I use for taking the hook out of the pike's mouth, and I just hit the pike on the top of the head real hard one time with those needle nose pliers. It spasms quickly, maybe a few seconds it spasms, and it's dead. For those who have ever tried to kill a mammal, it's a different kind of a story. When I kill a porcupine, there's not an easy way to kill a porcupine, and the life of mammals is very tenacious. I mean, mammals do not give up life easy. Even if you shoot a deer from a distance, when you get up upon that deer, chances are that deer's not going to be dead. In fact, it's probably not even going to be taking its last breaths. It's going to be struggling. You're going to have to shoot it again. And then, even after you shoot it again, you're going to have to cut its throat. When you try to kill a porcupine, I've tried different things. I don't use guns myself. I hate the sound and smell of the explosion. To me, it's a terrible thing. So, when I've hunted porcupines and other animals, I have a compound bow. I tried to use the bow. You can put a couple of arrows into a porcupine in vital points in it, and it's not dead yet. You still have to hit it on the head with something, with a heavy rod, a heavy stick, to kill it. And you have to hit it not just once. You got to hit it a few times to kill it. There's times I've tried to kill it just by the heavy rod alone, because shooting it with arrows just causes more agony. But it never goes quick, and it's not a fun thing. It's not a nice thing. And this is the dilemma. This is the big dilemma. um, that I think as a species is part of what we go through, is trying to sort this out. This is not a nice experience, having to kill other animals. Other animals that we recognize have all this same consciousness that we do. I mean, even if our cultural systems don't admit it, all you gotta do is be an actual human being and engage with that animal, and you'll know that it has all of that, that it has everything that we've got. It's just in a different body. So, given this dilemma, there's all different kind of cultural systems built to deal with it, built to negotiate this really primary ethical heart-wrenching dilemma of how do we eat, these others who are so much like us. And there's different answers for that. Some cultures, like I mentioned before, will say, well, you don't eat meat, you just eat plants. But as I explained, that's problematic, because all it means is you're killing animals, but you don't have to see it happen. You're killing them indirectly by taking their habitat. If, in other cultures, they make a separation. They say, these animals are the ones we'll eat, and these ones are the ones that we won't eat. And a lot of times that separation will be, well, sometimes that separation will be based on a domestication. And so they'll say, okay, these animals we raised, and you got the property thing going on. They belong to us, and they're here to feed us. A lot of cultures look at that taking of the life to feed ourselves as a gift that the animals give us. Other cultures believe that the animals are a gift that God gives us, and so we can eat them. I mean, one of the largest cultures of the world, at least of the Western world, believes this way, that God created man and then created these animals to feed the man. And that we're above them. And most of the world's kind of super cultures believe this, that we are above animals, that we are somehow fundamentally different from them and better than them. And these started off as traditions within religious systems and belief systems. This idea that we're above animals, that we were once animals, but we've become better than them. And even when Western science came along, and Charles Darwin came along with his notion of nature selecting for adaptation, natural selection, that was just basically, it was just reinterpreted into the same old cultural system as saying that we're above nature because we're able to adapt. We're in the survival of the fittest mode, and since we're surviving pretty well, we must be the fittest. And so, and there's been criticism of that. Obviously, this is an image that criticizes that idea. We're not exactly the fittest, but not only in this way. But I would say also that nature selects for adaptation has been misinterpreted, incredibly misinterpreted, where really adaptation is how well you fit into the whole, and it's a social whole. So, how well you can work within that whole rather than trying to dominate it. To me, that's adaptation. But anyway, I think these belief systems are all responding to that really universal ethical dilemma that we have. How are we justifying ourselves in the food that we eat when we have to kill things to eat that? And nowadays a lot of people are so removed from that they don't have to think about it very much. But if you get one of these people out there and say, all right, you want your hamburger, um, make it make it happen from scratch. Go out there and kill that animal and take it apart and make your hamburger. If they have that experience, it's going to change them. It's going to change their views. um, But for now, they're really comfortable, those kind of people, right? So you have, this is New York City. And this, to me, when I go to places like this, when I go to big urban areas, I see the belief system reflected in the landscape and the architecture and all of this. They've built themselves an image of themselves to be above nature. So they have the tall buildings looking down over nature. And yeah, nature's this pretty thing, but it needs to be, carefully sculpted, manicured, and all of this thing. And they can enjoy it. Nature is something for them um, to enjoy from their heightened position, from their ascended position. Me, when I go to places like New York City, I go there to watch the animals. I go there to try to learn from the animals, because to me there's nothing more interesting than urban animals. This is a red-tailed hawk called Pale Beauty, who's actually a famous hawk among naturalists. She lives in Central Park in New York City. And it's a gray squirrel next to her. And she did not kill that squirrel because she wasn't hungry. So animals, one of the things that I learned from animals, even in an urban setting, is they're not wasteful. They don't kill just to kill. They don't take more than they're going to use. Another belief system that I'm pretty familiar with is Blackfoot belief system, and this is the culture I'm pretty much grounded in. Have been for close to half my life now. I didn't grow up in it, but this is where I've come. And this is my TP. That's me on the right. And I'm about to have a ceremony. And that ceremony is the opening of the Beaver Medicine Bundle. And the Beaver Medicine Bundle is it's an embodiment of a treaty that was made between human beings and the animals of the ecosystem where I live. And within the ceremony, which is kind of a reenactment of a story, this is where in the Blackfoot system some of this stuff is dealt with about animals and our relationship to animals. And I've found a lot of my answers, not all of them, but a lot of them within this system of belief. And I'm not going to go into the whole story. It's a really long story, the Beaver Bundle. But I will say basically this: that in the story, there's there's kind of an impasse between the animals and the human beings, and uh, each one has part of the other. Like the beavers have this human man's wife, and his infant child is suffering because he has no mother anymore. And on the other hand, the man has stolen one of the beaver's pups, his favorite pups. He's kind of holding it for ransom. And so it's like the future generations at stake. And these two parties, the beavers and the humans, need to work something out so that the future generation will be okay. And there's one point in the negotiations where an otter stands up and addresses, there's all these different animals involved in the negotiations. The beavers brought in all of these animals that depend on it. If you know anything about beavers, you know that they're kind of a keystone species in an ecology. A lot of animals depend on the beaver, and the beaver would be one that I would consider to be actually highly adapted. Human beings, I don't think we're highly adapted. I think we're living on borrowed time, the way that we're living today. Beavers, on the other hand, are super highly adapted, and to me, that's signaled by the number of relations that are dependent on them, that rely on them, the biodiversity that relies on them. So they call in all their animal allies into these negotiations with the human beings. And the otter at one point stands up. He says, "Well, why are we taking this from this man? This man's nothing to us. Human beings, they're soft, they're slow, they're weak. They can't swim very good. They can't run very fast. They can't fly. They don't have, they're just arrived here. They're brand new. They're like babies. And this man's trying to push us around. Why don't we just all gang up on him and eat him?" And that proposal is considered by the animals. And it's the older, the kind of the wise beaver who says, eventually says, "No, we're not going to eat the guy, because we could gang up on him and we could eat him. But one way or another, somehow, if we do that, other human beings are going to find out about it, and they're going to consider us their enemies. And then they're going to go on killing us in the manner that they have been, like we don't matter to them. So instead, we're going to teach human beings some of the things, some of our things, some of our adaptations that have given us abilities to be faster, stronger, harder, swim, run, fly, fight. We're going to teach them things that they need to survive in this place, this particular place. And in turn, then human beings are going to have respect for us, because they're going to know that their way of life was given to them by us. And so they're not going to just kill us at random. They're only going to kill one of us when they need to eat. But otherwise, they're going to watch out for us. They're going to make sure that they don't screw up our lives. So this was kind of the original treaty with human beings and animals in Blackfoot territory. And from that, I get a lot. Me, myself, I get a different idea about evolution, about what adaptation is, and a different perspective on human beings. I personally don't hold human beings up to be more evolved than animals, higher than animals, more conscious than animals, more thoughtful than animals. The way that I look at it, the animals have lived here millions of years longer than us, in many cases. Some cases only, maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of years longer than us. But in any case, they've lived here long enough and learned to adapt and fit in And that's the thing with fitness with me. Fitness isn't about who can kill who, survival of the fittest. Fitness is about fitting in to the whole social matrix of the ecology. And so, um, these animals that are here today, they're the ones that have fit in. And if we want to fit in, because we're such a new species, we need to learn from them. How did they do it? How are they fitting in? They've fit in so long that they've come to embody a lot of that fitness, and this is the stuff that people call instinct. Yeah, I don't, I don't like the word instinct, because it makes them sound like they're, programmed robots and stuff. They're not. Yeah, having spent a lot of time with animals, I can tell you that every animal is a unique individual. Yeah, there's some things that they do that their species has come to embody. Um, there's things that we do that our species has come to embody, but I don't think in ways that are as fit as those of the animals. And so that's, to me, the human project. What we should be working on is, I think we should be working on how to fit better than we are. And for probably, you know 12,000 years, that was the project we were working on. And then something happened and we've been led astray. And a lot of that accumulated knowledge that we had gotten from the animals has now been lost to these cultural ideas about us being above the animals. Um, the knowledge that had been gained, a lot of it has been wiped out, with indigenous people that have been killed, who were carriers of that knowledge, of that thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. But anyway, um, I've tried to kind of, to the extent that I can, um, try to live more and more by this treaty, with the animals. So, um, I, I've tried to get myself away from eating commercial foods, for instance. I like to eat something that's here, that's part of the natural abundance of the place where I live, every day. Like this, for instance, this is a lunch that I brought, to work with me. These are choke cherries that I picked. This is wild mustard greens that I picked. This is pike meat, uncooked, sushi or sashimi that I made myself from pike that I caught. And this might be a lunch that I'll have, and it's 100% from, the place that I live, that I've gathered myself. I haven't paid anybody, and I think it's, to me, part of being an ethical eater is, to get engaged with your foods. Um, Foods are really, really important to human beings, to anything, but you know foods are part of the fundamental, um, stuff that makes up our social life. Like, you take sharing of food. What do young lovers do if they want to make their relationship better? They share food, right? They go and they'll eat together. What if you're visiting with your parents or relatives, or somebody that you want to improve your relationship with, or renew your relationship with, or start a relationship with? You're going to eat together, um, in a lot of occasions. Food is part of building a relationship. Okay? Sharing food. It's really fundamental to us. It's really, really important to us. And it's the same thing if you're trying to have a relationship with other species. You want a dog to love you, feed it. You want somebody to hate you, um, when they try to offer you food, turn up your nose and tell them no, and tell them that's the most disgusting thing you don't eat disgusting things like that. That's a incredible put down. So food is important to us, and me, um, part of what I try to do with food is I try to eat a lot of what comes from my place, because there is an abundance, and I live in a semi like desert environment, and I can get quite a bit of food from my environment. Um, this is my wife, and she's picking um, bullberries. We'll gather lots and lots of bullberries, and every kind of berry that comes into season. What I see, and I've traveled around quite a bit, what I see is that there's an abundance of food everywhere you go, and then most people ignore that food, and they'll go instead to the food that's at the grocery store. And that detachment, I think, um, is part of our relational problem with the world, the with our environment. Just in the same manner as that we build relationships between each other as human beings using food, by sharing food together. If we don't engage with the food of our environment, if we let total strangers who we never meet um, take care of getting our food for us, then we miss out on that relationship with the environment. So in order for us to get a closer relationship to the environment and to have more fitness in my evolutionary sense, um, you have to go out and engage with the food yourself. You have to go get food. So I teach this stuff, right? So this is, for instance, I'm teaching some of my students how to butcher a deer. I have a year-round class that I teach about foods, where all year I got my students out there working in the environment. And some days like this, when we've got something um, to process, we'll take it indoors to process and get out of the elements. A lot of times we're working in the cold, right? And I'll teach them right from scratch how to get the food, and then if it's an animal, teach them how to butcher the food. If it's plants, I'll teach them how to process the food, and I'll teach them ways to process the meat too. Like this is in my garage. This is a bunch of meat that I've just hung up to dry. And a lot of people go through all this expensive procedure with meat, where they have it in the freezers, and the freezers are using up electricity, or they'll at the very least they'll can it, and they've got to use a lot of energy to can that meat. You can just hang meat up from a string, and it'll dry, and it'll stay good for years. So I teach this kind of stuff to my students. And yeah, I live in kind of a rural area, and um, so some might say, well, that might work where you live, but if you don't live in a place like that, then where there's a lot of outdoors to work with, then how are we going to do this? Well, I've traveled around quite a bit. This is a picture that I took along the Skagit River in Washington State, um, I think last year. And this is a salmon, of course. Um, and what I was noticed, I was out salmon fishing. Actually, I was doing a presentation at a university, and then one of the professors said, "Hey, you want to go salmon fishing?" I was like, "Yeah." So we went out on a boat all day, and we were salmon fishing. But what I noticed was the shorelines of this river were littered with millions of salmon, millions of salmon, and these salmon had spawned, and then they died, and then they went ashore. And it's not waste, because some of these salmon will be taken off the shore by animals, brought up into the nearby forest. They'll be partially eaten, and they'll go to fertilize that forest. They're an important part of that ecosystem. So it's not entirely waste. But in the millions, it is kind of a waste, because not all of these fish are going to be brought up there. And if there's enough people living around this area that when the salmon have spawned, people could spend a few hours a day down at the river, and when they see that there's a salmon dying at the shore, they could take it and they could eat it. They could easily probably get a year's worth of salmon for a lot of people, if they went down there and took advantage of this. For the most part, what the animals take is just the eye. You can see that in this picture. Crow has come and taken the eye. That's the only thing it can really access. The animals would have more if the people were down there at the river, and the people took the fillet off the fish, and the people took the fillet to go and smoke and store for food. Then the animals would have the leftover. But because the people aren't acting like human beings, because they're so disengaged from this environment, the animals are only able to take the eye, because they have a hard time getting into this. Unless you're a bear or a coyote or something. But if you're a bird that would normally eat pieces of the salmon when human beings were acting like human beings, you can't get into this salmon. It's pretty tough, right? So you just take the only part that's available, and that's the eye. So we're not playing our role. And I noticed that there's an abundance of food in a lot of places that I go. There's far more food in these places than exists in the area where I live. Like I said, my area is kind of semi-desert area with a little bit of mountains, but for the most part it's semi-desert area. I go to the West Coast, all up and down the West Coast, from British Columbia to California and down into Mexico. There is such an abundance of wild fruit. I mean, you have up north, you have cherries, you have plums, you have pears, you have walnuts, you have hazelnuts, you have berries galore. You got tons and tons and tons and tons of fruit that grow everywhere throughout the Pacific Northwest. Same thing as you transition down into California and Mexico. Then you get into citrus fruit. You have even more fruit. It's ridiculous. There's absolutely no reason that I can see for why people who live along the West Coast, even the big population that lives there, why they can't live off the food that's naturally there. Why do they have to rely on commercial food? To me, it's ridiculous, because a lot of that stuff just dies on the vine. Most of it just dies on the vine. Even if you live in an urban area, one of the things that can be taken advantage of is the huge amounts of waste stuff that people are just tossing out. I mean, there's a whole movement of guys in the urban areas. They call themselves what are they? It's not a locavore, but freegan. They eat only free foods. They dedicate themselves to eating free foods, because you go behind a grocery store, you see stuff like this, and a lot of this fruit would be perfectly good fruit. It's just that it's reached its official expiry date, but it might have weeks left that it's still going to be good. So there's guys that go around and take this food. That's kind of extreme. Uh, if I lived in a big urban area, though, myself, I'd probably do that because I even here where I live, I take it to extremes that some people wouldn't do. For instance, um, this is some really nice meat cooking here, but I'll tell you that this meat came off a roadkill. A lot of people would kind of like get pretty squeamish at the idea of eating roadkill. But where I live, I got 7 months of winter, and I travel a certain stretch of highway almost every day. And when it's cold enough, during those 7 months, which is most of the 7 months, it's cold enough. When it's freezer temperature outside, if I come across an animal, um, I know that the animal's been hit by a car, and it's just basically sat in the freezer since it got hit by the car. And just like with the salmon in Washington, a lot of the animals that would normally eat this roadkill really can't do as much with it if I don't open it up for them. Right? It's very hard for even like eagles and stuff to get into the belly of a roadkill deer if it's not opened up. So me, when I'm driving in the winter and I come across a roadkill, I'll stop and I'll take some of the meat. There's a lot of good meat on the roadkill, especially if it's like a deer. You can get a month's supply of a deer meat, a month's supply easily to eat by stopping at a roadkill. So I eat roadkill, and this is one of the ways that you know, um, that I see myself as fitting in with the flow of the environment. A lot of people when they say, um, you just kind of got to go with what's happening out there in the world. You got to be realistic. Well, to me, this is kind of being realistic. Because most people, when they say that, they're just looking at human society and they're blinded to the whole rest of the world around them. When I look at what is the flow of energy that's happening right now, I look at the whole environment. Because I see animals and I see plants where most people don't see them. Um, and so when I see that there's a stretch of highway that I drive every day, and at least weekly somebody hits an animal, and that animal just lays there frozen on the side of the road, and the predators might come and scavengers might come and take a little bit of this and that they can actually get off of it. To me, it makes all the sense in the world to stop and take some meat, and at the same time open up that carcass for the other animals to come, so they can live, so they can survive. I feed animals. That's one of the ways that I feed animals. Is I'll help them with when there's waste that's caused by us that we've killed, like with roadkill. Then in order for them to effectively process it, eat it, and access it, we're supposed to open it up when we kill something. The way of nature is when we kill something, we're supposed to take our part and leave the rest for the animals. And so, since most drivers, when they kill something like that, they don't stop and open it up, that's a flaw in our way of life. So I'll stop, I'll open it up, I'll take pieces that I want, I'll leave the rest for the animals, and they'll actually be able to eat it. So that's one way I feed animals. Another way that I feed them is when I have food that I'm not going to eat anymore, that's either kind of on the way of going bad, or I just don't think I'm going to be able to store it. I'll feed it to the animals. If it's meat, I'll feed it directly to the animals. If it's vegetable stuff, then I'll compost it. It'll become part of the earth. We become In our society today, we become very, very stingy. We throw things away instead of giving them back to the earth. We would rather destroy things, and burn up that energy, uh, than give it back to the earth. Even with our bodies, we're really stingy. I mean, we won't even, there's that phrase, of whether you can give a shit. Well, we don't give shits. Other animals, they give their shit back to the earth, as fertilizer. We won't even give that. We have to put it somewhere and stash it away, and we don't give it back. Um, Same thing with our physical bodies. We consider our physical bodies to be, basically, we consider it to be hazardous waste. And so it's illegal to give your physical body back to the earth when you die. You either have to, basically lock it in a tomb, um, under steel and concrete, or you have to burn up that energy. Even if you have an operation at the hospital, they take something out of you, um, you're not allowed to take that thing and give it back to the earth. Say you get your appendix taken out, you're not allowed to take that appendix and give it back to the earth. Um, they have to burn it up because they consider it to be biohazardous material. They consider the human body to be biohazardous material. To me, that's insane. So we got problems. So I try in every way I can to feed the animals, and that feeding is part of, to me, developing relationships with them. Another thing I try to do, in order to give back, is I try to help animals when I can. So, for instance, this young red-tailed hawk in this photo, people know that I care about animals, and so I get a lot of phone calls when there's animals that are hurt or something's going on. So this young red-tailed hawk was just basically, it was starving. It's a fledgling that had left the nest, but it still wasn't able to get food on its own very well, and its mother had stopped bringing it food, so it was starving, and it got weak, and it stood on the side of the road for 3 days before somebody said, Ryan, there's a hawk on the side of the road. We noticed it's been there for 3 days if we passed. So I went and got it, and then this hawk was fed well and got strong, and went back to being a hawk. I recently, this last summer, I took on a volunteer service, in the city where I live, the city of Lethbridge, Alberta. We have a population of an at-risk species of prairie rattlesnake here, and as suburbia grows bigger, it takes up more and more habitat from the prairie rattlesnake. And everybody's aware, a lot of people have um, a real fear of snakes, and irrational, in my estimation, fear of snakes. So a lot of people will really panic when they come across a rattlesnake in their backyard. The rattlesnake might have been living there in their backyard for a month, and it never bothered them. But the minute that they happen to come across it, then they're kind of panicked. And so somebody needs to go and, in my perspective, rescue the rattlesnake from that situation. So I took that. I asked for that role about 2 years ago. There's an older retired guy who's been doing it for the last maybe 15 years here, and I called him about 2 years ago, and I said, um, if there's a way for me to help, let me know. And so recently he phoned, and he wants to turn that position over to me. So for the last part of this summer, I've been working with him, with the rattlesnakes, and going to rescue the rattlesnakes. The people think we're rescuing the people from the snakes, but the way we look at it, we're rescuing the rattlesnakes from the people. And so take the snake out of the backyard and bring it back to its home, and I know where all the rattlesnake dens are in our area. So this is one way I try to give back, and I don't have all the answers and all of that stuff. This is just I'm just expressing some of my opinions and perspectives about the ethical dilemma that I see as at very much at the core of our cultures and belief systems, and it's something that we'll never get away from. Is struggling with this ethical dilemma, but in the era that we're living in, I think the dilemma is even larger because so many of us are ignoring it. And to me, part of being a full human being is engaging with that ethical dilemma and trying to sort out how to be the most ethical, good person you can be in relation to these animals. So that's my thoughts.